Today I'm gonna show you how to make your own compost, quick, cheap, and no turning. All you need is green materials, brown materials, air, and water. Today we're gonna meet with an expert in compost, and if you stick till the end, I'm gonna harvest my own compost and show you 2 ways to use it in your garden.
I'm Michael. I've set up this social enterprise compost club where I'm collecting food waste and turning that into a living compost, and the whole process is kind of done with no fossil fuels. We've got an EV to do the collections and we've got a green energy supplier to charge that up, so it's all about not just minimizing an impact but having something that's actually sort of regenerative and making this place that we all live better. Initially, the method I use first of all is called Bokashi. I buy in a bran. You can also get a spray. The bran has an effective organisms inoculated onto it. Essentially what it does is it ferments food waste anaerobically, so with no air, and the idea is you kind of layer in like a lasagna method Bokashi bran and food waste. So you put a bit of bran in, maybe a couple of inches of food waste, and just sort of press it down. Then you do another little sprinkle of bran and you just keep layering it up. I've got like a 2 bucket system. Once one's full, you leave that for like 2 weeks while you're filling up the next one. What it does is it pre-digests the food waste, it breaks down structure, and then it means that you can either just bury that in the soil or you can then add it to a compost pile once it's been Bokashi'd as well. So the way that I use it is I Bokashi the food waste in the buckets while my members have those buckets. There's Bokashi already in there, and I've started giving them pots to add in gradually as well, so that by the time I get it and bring it back to site, it's already pre-digested. Then it goes into the composting system. It's really cool because it allows you to put cooked food, meat, dairy, anything in there. So another method of composting, which again is another one you can do at home, you can do it indoors even with little space, is worm composting. So you can buy wormeries. They're kind of similar to Bokashi in that they've got like 2 layers. So you've got the little tap at the bottom that filters away liquids, and you can use that as a plant feed. The worms are kind of in the top bit and you're adding food into there. A bit of carbon as well. Usually you want like a 1/3 or a 1/4 carbon, so you'd be wanting like shredded card or paper, and then you can put your raw veg peelings in. The thing with worms is they don't like, you wouldn't put any cooked food in there, you wouldn't put meat or dairy in there, but they're really great composters. I mean, if you get specific composting worms, they will digest their own body weight every day. They make an amazing compost. Everything that goes through that worm gets inoculated with this beautiful biome that's in their little guts, and if you keep them happy, there's population boom because they're just mating and putting all these little cocoons in that have up to 20 eggs. Usually you get 2 or 3 worms from each one. So another good method of composting is in vessel units, particularly in an urban environment. With these kinds of things you can also put in all types of food waste, because the idea is they're actively tumbling, so they're speeding up the decomposition. And there's a little plus on this one door. So the idea is I was putting equal parts food waste and wood chips in there until it was like 3/4 full. It took me about 3 weeks, and then you swap the doors round, so then you've got a little clock on there, so that's just sort of maturing. Then you have the plus on this side. By the time you fill that up for 3 weeks, you can empty this side, so you've got like a constant throughput. This one has like a little gear for turning. Emptying wise, these ones are nice, these maze units, because the door just slides out, so you get it so it's at the bottom and you just slide it out and it drops into a container or a tarp or whatever. Maturing composting is just a really important part of the process. So there's a couple of ways that I do it here, depending on the space. A cool way of doing it is with a windrow that I've got here. And then I also use these Johnson Su bioreactors, which I find are kind of really good ways of doing it in terms of having the way that they're structured, allowing for passive aeration. You can do them smaller, so they're at home in a mesh hoop, and you just either structure them around pipes for aeration, or you can just build them and use a big like branch and just push down and create those chimneys for the air to flow through. The greens and browns thing, sometimes people get lost in that. Say for example, a common one is spent coffee grounds are brown, but they are a high nitrogen, so I always just try to frame it as nitrogens and carbons. But you can't go wrong with having a 50-50 in terms of volume. So if you've got 1 caddy full of food waste, 1 caddy full of wood chips is the ideal thing, but you can also use shredded card, shredded paper, the little tube in the middle of the toilet paper. I always try to recommend wood chips higher than any of those other things, just because wood chips hold structure in a compost pile for longer. They take longer to break down, but they keep gaps for air, so you don't need to turn it so much. Whereas if you imagine like a load of shredded paper gets wet and it just sort of compresses down and it loses all that air. So you just need to be mindful that you might need to be more vigilant with turning and making sure everything's evenly distributed. Primarily what you'd want to do maintaining a pile is making sure that that moisture level is right. So if you add more nitrogen, you're tending to get more wet input. So if it starts to get too wet, you can then always add more carbon. And likewise, if it's too dry, you can add in more nitrogen, maybe even some liquid in there.
So now we just got back home. We're gonna harvest some compost from this compost bin that I still have to open up since we made it. Using this composting system is great for a small space, and you can simply lift up the mesh once you want to harvest the compost. We even sifted some to remove the bigger pieces of debris, which are going back into another pile, and we found a lot of fungal activity, which is always a great sign. You can then place some cardboard at the base and start filling up your pile again with layers of carbon and nitrogen, like explained by Michael before. We managed to get roughly 310 kilograms of homemade compost from an area of just 1 by 1 meters, and all we did was to clear up the area, put the system back in place with the pallet at the bottom and the looped mesh on the top, and now we can fill it up with new food scraps, green waste, cardboard and coffee ground or many other materials that usually goes to waste to transform it again into compost. And now I'm going to show you 2 ways to use this amazing source of nutrient into your garden. The first method is top dressing. Because we're using a no-dig system, all you need to do at the beginning of the season is to top up with a thin layer of compost, and that's enough nutrients for all your plants to thrive. You can also use it to top up your raised beds and add other amendments to improve the biodiversity of microorganisms in your garden. The next method is to make compost tea. All you need to do is to add a couple of handfuls of homemade compost into a bucket, top it up with water, mix it well, strain, and then use that liquid into your garden. It will be full of a biodiversity of nutrients and microorganisms which will enrich the life inside your soil, but also you can use the leftover solid part to top up your raised beds. You can also do the same with worm casting, diluting 50-50 with water and compost tea.